First of all, thank you all for joining. It's great to have you here. Secondly, it's super happy to have Alex Hesterberg here, Chief Customer Officer at Delphix. And more than that, you know, managing Chief Customer Officer and VP Customer Success and whatnot in amazing companies, Turbonomics, Symantec, many others. You'll talk about your background, I guess,
Yeah.
but really a champion in generating growth. And really exciting to hear about how you built customer success organizations, how you help companies, you know, identify customers as champions and advocacy, long tail scale, a lot of interesting topics. We have what is a chief customer officer to begin with. So all of those and much more. For the housekeeping stuff, I see Erwin wrote me audio. Can you hear me, Erwin, or not? Like, guys, can you just write, you know, if you don't hear us?
I can definitely still hear you. Oh.
Yeah, all good. Great. Thank you, Asaf. So, cool. So, I mean, while we wait for everybody to join, on today's topics, Alex will talk about his journey. He'll talk about, you know, different topics. Just so you know, before that, a few housekeeping notes. First of all, we have Q&A. So whenever you have questions, like there's a Q&A button, just put them in there. We'll make designated stops 2 or 3 times. And also, of course, at the end, try to answer as many questions as we have. So feel free to hit Alex with questions. He loves that. Secondly, we'll reach it at the end, but we'll have a poll. Feel free to answer our poll. I'll reach that in a moment. And we're recording this. So we'll send everybody the recording at the end. That's for the housekeeping. A little bit about CrowdVocate. So we're a customer advocacy and marketing automation platform. We help companies engage their customer base across their journey. But we're really happy to build this whole category of customer marketing and advocacy and build a community and share information with professionals and champions such as Alex. I'll talk about the next webinars that we're going to have. So feel free to join our webinars. We have a Slack channel. You can ping me if you're a customer marketer and want to join that. And that's a little bit about us. The way we look at it is, you know, customers can be a growth engine, right? Customer-led growth. If you can identify within your customers your advocates and you can activate them, and then you could basically measure the success. This is a flywheel. HubSpot calls it the new flywheel, basically for helping you grow your customer base and turning your customers into your co-marketers, co-sales, co-product development, co-everything, turning customers into partners and together growing the company, the product. And finally, about customer marketing, it's really everything post-sale in marketing. So if customer success, and we'll talk about it with Alex, but if customer success has, you know, the kind of white glove and one-on-one and taking care of the customer, whether it's, you know, support or growth initiatives, but more from an in-depth relationship. Customer marketing is marketing. It's one-to-many. It looks at the post-sale journey as a marketing initiative, whether it's onboarding, whether it's, of course, events, community, advocacy, voice of the customer, references, lifecycle marketing, retention marketing, all of that. Think of those marketing initiatives as a one-to-many, kind of being the air cover together with customer success. And lastly, we have other webinars, so keep tuned. We're going to have a webinar about the connection between customers, communities, and customer advocacy. We're going to have reference-based management, and we're going to have one about customer experience and product marketing, also 2 kind of roles that tie up. And with that, I think we're, yeah. Last announcement, we launched a new website. Hope you love it. Take a look, a lot of content over there. And now I'll give the mic to Alex to talk about himself. While we do that, I'm going to shoot out a poll. The poll is designated for customer marketing and advocacy, but feel free to answer. Those answers, 20 will win, you know, a solution of their choice. The Phanocracy book, 1-hour consultancy about advocacy or whatnot, or a $20 gift card. And with that, Alex, you have the board.
The Phanocracy book. Love it. Yeah. So we're definitely going to have a couple of components of the presentation today talk about advocacy, both at the more one-to-one or one to a few tier one level, as well as that kind of long tail where it's really one to many, and the partnership with marketing is key. So just as by way of introduction, my name is Alex Hesterberg. I'm currently the Chief Customer Officer of a company called Delphix. Delphix has been around a little over 10 years. I only joined about 3 months ago. So some of what I'm going to take everybody through today, a lot of it is kind of hot off the presses in terms of how I've been very, very fortunate to work with some great teams in the past and instantiate some of the pillars around customer success and customer advocacy. Prior to that, I was the Chief Customer Officer of Turbonomic as they scaled sub 100 million through 100 million and hit that sort of $1 billion valuation. Prior to that, I was running worldwide customer success and technical field operations for Pure Storage for their actually right around about 100 million pre-IPO, all the way through to over $1 billion in revenue, annual revenue, and then obviously through the IPO on the other side. And prior to that, I ran all of worldwide post sales for Riverbed technology, which was, I joined right at IPO, it was about 160 million. And as we scaled the company from 160 million to 1.4 billion in annual revenue. And that took us about 6.5 years. So very, very fortunate to have worked with some incredible teams, pre and post, marketing, engineering, product, sales. And so it's been a fantastic sort of ride and lessons learned. And I get the feeling that I'm almost like long in the tooth or old hat when it comes to customer success. I think I've now been on teams that we've implemented 5 customer success automation platforms at this point in my career, at least. And that doesn't include deploying twice at one company. So technically 6 times. Anyway, so that's a little bit about me. I'll give you a little bit of context of my role at Delphix, which has pretty much been the same for the last 3 companies. I am actually responsible for not only all of post sales, including customer success and the customer success function, but also pre-sales. And so that's been the case. There was a case of Turbonomic, it was a case of Pure Storage. And so in a way, and I'll share some kind of thoughts and insights and trends we're seeing in the customer success, especially from a leadership perspective, field today. But the coverage of customer success can actually span well beyond just the kind of traditional customer success manager function. And if you think about it from a customer lifecycle perspective, especially if you're in a subscription business, setting expectations in pre-sales and owning them all the way through post-sales, all the way into the secondary and tertiary deals is really what this is all about. Right? That's the fundamental difference between perpetual and subscription businesses. So with that, Gal, do you want me to, I don't want to press the end poll thing. Should I shift to sharing my screen?
Yeah, and I'll end the poll in a minute. So everybody take 1 more minute if you want to kind of win the prizes, answer the poll, and we'll take it off and move on.
Very good. So hopefully you can see my screen. I'll give everybody another 30 seconds or so.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we can stop the poll now, no problem.
All right. Good. I love the polls. That's good. All right. So first and foremost, I get this question quite a bit, and I get it from customers as much as I get it from sort of people in the industry. What is the Chief Customer Officer? And there's a hilarious but very, very real way to answer this. And number one, you ever remember those slides of what my mom thinks I do, what my friends think I do, and all that? Well, if you try to explain this to somebody outside of especially tech and subscription and infrastructure tech, it's difficult. My mom thinks I do Steve Jobs type work. I couldn't hold a candle to that. The board thinks I'm a kitchen sink. Almost every board of directors kind of looks at, it's amazing how many questions pop up in the board meetings that almost directly or indirectly get deferred to the customer success, customer centric, customer advocacy team or teams. Teams themselves, actually, we find, especially when you're at $100 million or a sub $100 million company, in that sort of growth stage, everything is, not everything, but a lot of things are still fire drills. You're going from 7 hats to 4 hats to 3 hats, and you're building functions and you're creating new roles. And so almost everything feels like it's a bit of a sprint, and you're constantly making a plan and redoing the plan and then doing it again. But what I love to joke about, what I actually do, and I have the t-shirt, is live in the world of, it may not be my fault, but it is my problem. And I think that encapsulates, I think, the perspective of customer success, particularly over the last, let's just say its evolution over the last 3 to 5 years. Everything seems to be sort of on the shoulders of customer success. And after sort of having to live through it for so many years, I was fortunate to work with some great teams that we kind of helped contextualize it for each other of what that really, really means. And so if you get it down to the bare bones, you know, the CCO ends up really becoming the ultimate outcome owner. And outcome is a broad term. It's a great term, and it really, really fits the customer success model. But to be focused on what the customer is supposed to get or where they're supposed to be. And delivery of those outcomes essentially is that new definition of service, right? Which is why so many different groups that were traditionally labeled different services organizations really first routed to being within the customer success or under the CCO function. And, you know, the concept of service and helping and selling are really becoming blended. The bifurcation is not as draconian as it was back in the day. And we're starting to see that in how customers need to be catered to, how we end up closing business and expanding business, and ultimately how we're incentivizing our field organizations. And yeah, there's definitely a message here that I'll harp on a few times. You know, if it may not be your fault, but it is your problem. The answer to that is you really have to be bold, and you have to be able to own and drive accountability, even in organizations, groups, and functions that you don't own. And if you can do that well, it starts to crystallize the direct and indirect responsibilities of a chief customer officer. And let me give you an example. So, and this is kind of my own journey over the last really 10 to 15 years. The CCO really started owning, or at least that concept started owning, obviously, services. I see a lot of people in these roles, men and women who had extensive careers in professional services, training and certification, technical support. So really kind of focused on the customer, you know, their direct engagement with the customer, solving problems, trying to close gaps between product and ultimately what customers really wanted. And initially that was kind of enough. And then, you know, renewals initially, especially with perpetual business, was just getting the maintenance renewal in. All right. So it was perpetual license, sometimes a kitchen sink license in an enterprise license agreement. And then the renewal ended up being this thing at the end that businesses use to negotiate to get the next ELA. But as the shift to subscription happened, that renewal took on a whole new definition. There's still customers, there's still vendors that sell in perpetual or partially perpetual ways, but almost everyone is either trying to launch a subscription or convert to subscription. And if you haven't read the story on Adobe of how they actually, as a public company, shifted from perpetual to subscription, like literally in the public eye, it's a fantastic story. I encourage all of you to look it up and to read it. But that gave rise to the need of kind of this adoption-centric customer success team, which in and of itself has got some interesting nuances and complexities. But ultimately, here's where the chief customer officer, the VP, SVP, customer success, this is what it really started to encapsulate. But at least in my role, trying to own the outcome all the way to the point where a customer will pay for that outcome or maintaining that outcome again, which is what a subscription renewal is. Getting the customer feedback started to shift a little bit from being a pure marketing play of collecting surveys and maybe having some user groups. And this kind of function started to become a shared function between customer success and the marketing organizations. I work very, very tightly with my marketing organizations at my current company and my last 4 companies, putting together user groups, putting together customer advisory boards, and leveraging each other for digital touch, which I'll get to in a second. The other element is, where do outcome expectations get set in the first place? And that's actually in the sales cycle. And so What you're starting to see now, and I'll show you in a slide or two, is the expansion of ownership of the customer success or CCO function actually bleeding into pre-sales. Now, a lot of that has to do with DNA. I mean, does the CCO have sales experience? Does he or she have technical sales experience? Is that a bridge too far for somebody who's maybe traditionally owning tech support? So some of this is DNA centric, but there's a method to this kind of madness, because you want to own that outcome as it's being set. You want to actually enable and train that team that's setting those outcome expectations, because if you're owning the team that's got to deliver on them, closing that gap is critical to success. But even beyond that, now we're going to get truly outside the scope, but this is going to go along the lines of where interlocks are key. Who owns building the effective technology in the first place that is associated with that outcome? That's engineering. Who owns designing the enhancements to that technology as customers adopt more, as the market changes, as you add more features? That's product management. And who owns building that enhanced technology in a timely fashion? That's back to engineering. And who owns the long tail customers? Meaning, we can't have CSMs, we can't have six-figure services deals on every single customer account. Well, who owns touching and engaging with them? In some cases it's the CSMs, but the marketing teams at most companies have built a fantastic set of tools and components, drip campaigns, webinars, surveys that can allow a bi-directional relationship with long tail customers. And finally, aggregating that feedback of that massive customer base, because not everybody's going to be on the customer advisory board, not everybody is going to go to the user group, and not everybody's going to be able to make it to the conference. So who owns making sure that there is a bi-directional messaging of value and collection and aggregation of value that ultimately can play a role in how the tech is being evolved in the first place? So there's so many different components here that even if you have a chief customer officer that owns more than just customer success and some of the traditional services organizations, even if you have them expand out and own pre-sales, even if you have them even own a component of product, which I've not seen yet, or even engineering, there are a lot of different groups which are critical to a company's go-to-market strategy in terms of customer adoption, upsell, cross-sell, and renewal. And they're not ultimately going to be owned by the CCO. I'm not going to read this slide to you. I hate wordy slides, but I wanted to give everybody a sense of what the interlocks look like for somebody who's ultimately in charge of the customer base, or is the chief customer officer. What are the different interlocks that person, that he or she has got to rely on in order to be successful? Some of the functions they may own. Sellability, the CCO may or may not own the pre-sales organization. Deliverability or serviceability, chances are he or she will own the professional services team. Consumability, this is where the CSMs live. They have to live in how a product is being adopted and how it is being consumed and put to work. That is why CSMs wake up in the morning. That's why they're engaging with customers in the first place. They have to live in consumability. And then finally, supportability, the resiliency of the product, the go forward expansion and value of the product, the reliability of the product. All the different organizations, there are organizations associated with these interlocks that are owned by essentially a customer success org, but there are many that are not. And so if you look at these four key pillars, there are three elements to each one besides its definition. Number one, there are artifacts. So what are the different components of these pillars? Demos, POVs, defining a delivery method, the UI itself, the ability to do remote support, remote upgrades. There are artifacts that are part of each one of these things that the customer is going to depend on, and they may or may not be owned by the customer success team. There are stakeholders that are cross-functional. And then finally, there are processes associated with those stakeholders and with those artifacts. And the best guidance that I can give, and the most success we've had, especially scaling from sub 100 million to that 100 million to 200 million, where everybody's getting stretched and pulled in a lot of direction, is to take the time to define where your organizations sit within these four pillars, and define what the pillars mean for you and what the artifacts are and what the processes and interlocks are, so that you can actually make customer success a woven part of your every week, every month, every quarter execution as a business, rather than it being something that you pull together and throw on the shoulders of a few when something's going sideways, right? I find most companies with smart people, sharp people, committed, tenacious, they don't have a problem coming together when things are going sideways. When things are broken, there's a problem with the product, there's a problem with a key customer. Most companies out there now, they'll pull the right leadership, they'll pull the right executives, they'll pull the right subject matter experts together. They will put money and time aside, and they will all come together to help a customer when a customer is in need and it's an emergency. That's not usually the hurdle most companies have to get over. The hard part is really indoctrinating something so that each week, each month, every single group, every single function within the company has a very clear understanding of what their role is in customer success and how they play that role systematically, so that you don't show up to the product team every 2 weeks, dump a bunch of things on their shoulders saying, all of these things have to be prioritized on the roadmap or else you're going to get a lot of customer churn. Happens every day. And so systematically involving product management, for example, in the consumability component, instead of jumping and dropping a bunch of things on their shoulders once or twice a month, is a way that they can become part of the customer success delivery. So again, a lot of words on these slides. We'll be sharing them out, but these are some examples of where of processes, artifacts, and stakeholders where we've been able to bring a company together in a systematic delivery of customer success.
So, yeah, I mean, actually, this is the next question. So what's the difference between, Chief Customer Officer, Chief Revenue Officer, I could say Chief Operations Officer, at least in HubSpot, and I think they're unique in that sense. The Chief Customer Officer, relatively new, I think she's 6 months in the role,
Yes.
Owns marketing. So
Yep.
CMO reports to Chief Customer Officer, owns customer success on all its organizations, so sales. So it's really like all the, if you will, customer-facing organizations from sale to closure to marketing are under the Chief Customer Officer. And then, of course, you have other organizations, product development, whatnot. But I mean, so interesting to know, the differences in your view. I think every organization has a different insight to that. And do some organizations have together both? Asaf asked if 2 organizations can have like also all 3 roles or 2 of the roles together.
Yeah, so absolutely. And so we got a great example here with Nick, who's over at App Dynamics. So this just popped up when I was kind of finalizing some of the content for the webinar. This actually popped up on my LinkedIn feed, and I was like, wow, what a great example. So Nick, for about 2.5, 3 years, was the Chief Customer Officer of App Dynamics, and then he was since then promoted into Chief Revenue and Customer Officer. So he had a background in sales. So he'd carried a bag, he had led a sales team before, he had run forecast calls, and he had reported up essentially 8 and 9 figure numbers in the business before. So for him, he had the DNA to actually assume some of the responsibilities of the CRO. And so combining that CCO, which technically would own renewals, might have some kind of incentive for expansion, and now having the CRO own part of expansion, but also net new logos and new pursuits. If you have a leader who's in place that actually has that DNA, it's not a bridge too far. And I'll give you some examples here of why it's not a bridge too far. And I think the new CCO of HubSpot, I believe she had a bit of a marketing background prior to joining. And so, she was in a position already where she had built and run, I don't know if either every dimension of marketing, so lead gen, content gen, all those kind of things that are directly affiliated with customers and pipeline conversion and demand generation, and also had honed skills over her career to own post-sales and I don't know if she owns pre-sales, but this is where you might see these sort of groups switch based on historicals and based on DNA. And there are other elements too that you have to think about it. There's no right way or wrong way per se to organize your sales and success organizations. Interestingly enough, before I joined Delphix, I would say probably half, maybe a little less than half, 40% of the opportunities that I was getting inbound were actually for chief operating officer roles. So they were, because we're the last 3 companies I'd been at, owning the renewals was actually the lion's share of the money that was coming in every year. And so there was an incentive plan for sales. I had owned the pre-sales technical organization, and the net new business we got was actually more like 30% of our business in terms of net new logos. 70% of our business every year was coming from the install base, which ultimately fell to my responsibility.
Yeah,
So
very common in SaaS. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Right. So that is the bedrock, right? So there's no right or wrong way, but there are some things you need to, that should be thought about, DNA aside. So now we're looking at the company, forget the DNA of the leadership, because I think that's where there's a little bit of flexibility in, what CCO would own pre-sales or marketing, or which one would own sales, like in Nick's case, or where you'd be in a position for a COO where you would own pre-sales, you would own sales, you would also own marketing. But it's important to understand the dynamics of the market you're selling into. So the expansion plays, are you a complex technology sale? Are you a multi-organizational sale? Are you having to traverse a lot of different business units when you're doing a deal? And are you favoring doing initial deals and then getting much more from your expansion accounts? If you're a subscription company, so you just mentioned SaaS, retention nowadays is the new acquisition. When you have 60%, 70, 80% of your business rely on coming from your install base, retention is by far one of the most critical components. If you look at the different metrics I'll talk about in a second that are geared towards company valuation. If that's the case, which I think it is, customer go lives, customer consumption of your product and achieving success with your product line or your platform or your service should be as celebrated as a net new logo. Renewals, like I mentioned earlier, become the bedrock of the company. We saw back in the late 90s and early 2000s that the maintenance renewals became this sort of drawer of cash that big companies like Symantec and Veritas and HP could rely on in order to be able to kind of give them a bedrock of stability. And this was all back in the perpetual days. So all of that is now converted, obviously, to subscription. And we take a lot of those, almost every deal now, ratably. And then the final thing is the sellers, essentially becoming a little bit more helping, having that in their repertoire, and your helpers, as you go, especially from that sub 100 million to post 100 million to $500 million, your CSMs, which initially become that kind of kitchen sink for help, they need to evolve into a bit of a seller. And I'll talk about that in a second. That I've seen a lot especially in the last 6 months across the customer success communities, where CSMs are saying, I don't want to be a seller. It doesn't mean you have to have a quota, but it does mean business development and opportunity development and pipeline development should not be a bridge too far for you. And so, we'll take Delphix. These are actual Slack channel. These are actual, this is the win channel from our Slack, right? I think almost any company does this. And again, I've only been on board about 10, 11 weeks at this point. So we introduced a new component to the Slack win channel here. But so when we do a renewal or an expansion, we're celebrating it. When we're doing a net new business win, we're celebrating it. And there's sort of all the different sort of icons, everybody's excited. But I'll tell you what, we're right now on a trajectory to see almost 85% of our business this year come from the install base. And it doesn't mean we're not getting net new logos in. It means we're not necessarily whale hunting. We're okay with getting smaller deals closed and we're celebrating them, but we're starting to also celebrate when those accounts are activated, when the ROI is captured and cleared and agreed to, and we're celebrating the people that are part of that. So and then I'm being kind of transparent with you and everybody on the webinar. We're heading to a point where by the time we get to the end of this fiscal, which will be the end of my first fiscal, won't be a full year, but we will be going into next year with incentive plans for CSMs, not just to incentivize them on ROI and go lives, but also to incent them on expansions. And again, not to quota them on expansions and turn them solely into sharks, but to actually incentivize them and reward them when customers are so happy and so delighted and consuming so much of our product, they not only renew, but they expand.
So where does customer marketing and advocacy come into play with all of this?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. I have a whole kind of heuristic I'm going to take everybody through. So, with renewals being the bedrock of the company, not solely sales, almost all those different metrics have a couple things in common: expansion and renewals. And so she or he who owns expansion and renewals essentially owns the operational bedrock of the company. And so if you are in that customer success leadership role, and these are your sort of your focal points, your OKRs, this is what you're paid on, you should realize that you're owning that bedrock of the company. And the sellers evolving into helpers and the helpers evolving into sellers, that's where we get a little bit more nitty gritty on things like comp plans, incentivizing sales reps and AEs to break the hockey stick, hit their number within the first 2 months of the quarter, or not necessarily let it go to the last part of the quarter, but also to create rewards and incentives for CSMs so that hitting that 120% of NRR for their book of business on a quarterly and first half and annual basis, they'll get their sort of "I'll be true to you" bonus, where customers are staying and they feel advocated for. So speaking of advocacy, so there's a couple of ways to attack this. And I took a heuristic from tier 1 and I took a heuristic from tier 3. And what I wanted to take each one of you through it, and also part of the process, not the entire process, because it would take too long. Because customer advocacy is basically a proxy for, when you think about it, customer health, customer management, customer ownership, and engagement. And in a sense, what I look at it as is putting the customer first. But you can't put every single customer first. But what you can do, and again, this is not going to be a slide that I read off of, but you can take the steps to define what a healthy advocated customer looks like. This is an example of an exercise we go through when we are defining what a healthy customer looks like. These are the questions that we're asking. And this is sort of the profile that we build in terms of what does a healthy customer look like? How well do they understand our tech, our landscape? Have they had a great pre to post sales experience? Do they feel supported within the product? Are they attending the user groups? Are they responding and attending the webinars? Are they giving us positive NPS scores? Are they renewing on time? Are they renewing early? We have some numbers and some financials we put in place in terms of, are they already to scoping with us their secondary or tertiary deal within their first 6 months of doing business with us? Have they closed that deal within 12 months of doing business with us? So this is there's a reason why this is a bit of a kind of a mishmash of responsibilities, because it's not a customer's profile and how well advocated they are and how healthy they are and how engaged they are is not solely the responsibility of the customer success team.
Right.
There are elements in here that are part of the marketing team as a responsibility, the sales team's responsibility, the executive team's responsibility, product and engineering team. And so what we end up doing is taking the exercise of capturing what does a healthy customer look like, and then we build the heuristic based on the tier. So I'm going to kind of fast forward, which I do in the here. I'm going to fast forward to kind of the output, but step 1 is what does a healthy advocated customer look like, and then what does that customer require to become and stay that way? And that's where you get into a heuristic of engaging a customer, and you share the responsibility. And I'll take you through tier 1, and I'll take you through what we do for tier 2. And this might be a good time as we go through this, Gal, to talk about the role of marketing, the role of advocacy programs, especially as you go tier by tier. So for us, tier 1, positive business outcomes, executive buyer has to be in place. This is something that's captured in most sales cycles, especially if you use MEDDIC or BANT. It's a common sales methodology capture data point. Partner identification. So for tier 1 for us, we were always trying to become more of a channel company. And we know that it's very difficult as you get to 100 million and beyond to scale a company, especially an infrastructure tech company, without a partner network of SIs, SPs, and VARs. Automations and integrations for us, those are our sticky components. So where we are integrated into a handful of specified third-party technologies, we know we're maintaining stickiness, and we know we can deliver a 1 + 1 = 10 value. The weekly touch points with our consumability touch points with CSMs, ensuring that there are successful onboarding and advisory services. So if you have your services team with their PSA tool, they're capturing when onboarding start and stop. They're capturing when advisory services are also engaged. And the final part of the top part is the engineering and the engineering product management quarterly touch point. I'll get to this in a second because we sometimes weave this into something else, and we do this differently at tier 3. Training and education for end users, our bi-weekly, we call it the D-Day letter, the Delphix Day letter. We used to call it something else at previous companies, but this is the communication protocol that we've agreed to with the customer, where we do 3 things. We send a note to the executive buyer that is a top of the fold executive level communication, which summarizes these 3 these 3 components. Number 1, where are we at relative to positive business outcomes? Why did you buy us? How far are we in delivering it? And what value have you received? The second thing, we call out champions. I'll skip ahead a little bit because user and operational champions are key. We call them out in our communication back to the executive buyer. Frank did we'd say, Jennifer did an amazing job. She was supposed to get something done in 2 weeks. She got it done in a week. As a result, we were able to pull forward some value. Joe, on the other hand, he's running into some problems with the operations team. Can you support him and us and help us get past this hurdle? And the third thing that we're doing is we're outlining what they could be doing with us that they're not doing with us. And so we use that as a mechanism to keep that executive buyer and his or her team updated before getting to things like executive briefings. If you do it well enough and lightweight enough, by the time that EB and his or her team show up in executive briefing, they're already aware of what's going on. You're not catching them up on 6 months of pain, suffering, value, ROI. They're aware. That executive briefing turns into a forward-looking, proposal-centric exercise, not something that is looking at either pain or success in the arrears. Expansion opportunity in Salesforce, so we can track this in Salesforce, and I'll get to tracking in a second. Champions we already spoke about, and then finally, what almost every company does, what is the status of somebody's enhancement requests or support cases? What you're looking at here is a heuristic that, number 1, all of these elements can be tracked automatically. They can be tracked in Salesforce.com, in your customer success automation tool, in your marketing automation tool, if people are attending webinars, if they're consuming certain content, if they've been to your conference. So everything here can be automatically tracked and then pulled together to create essentially what looks like a scorecard. Now, I'm not saying your percentages would be the same as my percentages, but as a customer success leader, it kind of drove me crazy after a while when people would say, is the account yellow? Is it red? Is it purple? Is it green? And I wanted to have a systematic way against which I could really weight the value of the progress we made or the progress we are not making in a particular account. And so those weights that you see around all of these different dimensions, they all add up to 100%. And if one of these things is not in place, it gets debited that percentage. And each one of these has slightly different frequencies, but what I'll tell you is this: if we don't know the positive business outcomes and we're not aware of who the executive buyer is, if we don't have those fields filled out, that account immediately goes yellow. Doesn't matter if everything else seems to be going great. If the customer and us are not aligned on why they purchased us, what the value metrics are, and there's an executive buyer that can actually attest to it, we're in trouble. And this is a posture that we are taking, not only with net new accounts, where we're doing a much better job of capturing those metrics and reporting back on them in a systematic way, like down here, but we're going back to the existing install base and making sure that we are calibrated and aligned. Following a heuristic like this will allow you to better withstand churn on your own side. So your CSMs churn, your own RSMs or your account executives churn. But if you have changes in organizational structure or ownership on the customer side, having these elements in place lets you know when you're deficient of users that are either user operational champions, when you've had executive buyers change, when priorities and business objectives have changed. You can use this as sort of a backbone for, am I healthy or am I not healthy? Now, let's take it one step further here, especially, and let's talk about kind of marketing and advocacy. So executive briefings, I've always had marketing play a massive role in organizing customer advisory boards, user groups, and elements like executive briefings. Marketing has always been kind of the one-stop shop for content development, content creation, content dissemination. but also being able to track who and what is consuming this at what kind of rate and pace. And this becomes critically important, especially as you talk about kind of long tail. So we're switching from looking at a tier one account where you might be over-investing your own resources into a one-to-one or a one-to-few set of relationships into a one-to-many. Now, the good news is everything on here is still trackable. Everything is still kind of automatically traceable and trackable through your CRM system, your customer success automation tool, your marketing automation platform. You can still kind of track these things. But if you notice, there's a little bit of a posture shift. Still, PBOs, executive buyer, you still have to have that. Your reliance on not just a partner being identified, but a certified partner running point is much, much higher, much more highly weighted. The optimizations, instead of worrying about a smaller long tail customer doing advanced integrations with a number of third-party products, what you want to be able to capture is some kind of automation or optimization, and that it's been realized. A lot of this is going to fall onto the shoulders of the partner. So a lot of what I just showed you is actually going to be shifting from tier one to the shoulders of the partner, delivering as an extension of us in tier three. The monthly marketing content. So this is where drip campaigns, nurture campaigns, where your content that is tied to use cases and outcomes that you've already identified are the sweet spot of your product, and you track what customers are using which use cases and what value they're deriving, you can bring that to your marketing team and leverage that for sophisticated drip campaigns and nurture campaigns to your install base, tied to the outcomes and the use cases that you already captured in the sales process. We rely on this heavily for our digital, for our long tail and our digital touch. Without it, we're kind of shotgunning, and we're trying to throw as much content at as many people as we can. But this is where you're talking about optimizing your omni-channel and really tailoring that content to why they started engaging with you in the first place. And I know a lot of things like nurture, drip campaigns, well, drip campaigns are more associated with email marketing. Nurture campaigns are traditionally associated with lead generation and trying to turn some kind of a lead into a pipeline opportunity, the MQL into the SQL. But I would argue that nurture campaigns are equally as important for the long tail of existing customer base. And so I never really thought about, and I had a very, very smart, wise CMO, guide me many years ago and saying, why would we treat the nurturing and the education of a prospect any different than the nurturing and the education of a digital touch customer? Because who else is going to be having that conversation? Who's going to be tailoring that content? And aren't they so much more valuable to us that we've captured them and we can't get to them? If it's a one-to-many model, it almost becomes more important than trying to get that prospect converted. So this is where between the company conference attendees. So we just had our digital, Delphix calls it the data company conference. We had over 700 registrations. We had somewhere between 450 and 500 attendees from many countries all across the globe. And we tracked everybody that came in. We tracked what content that they were interested in. We had follow-up surveys, and we had follow-up drip campaigns for webinars and content that was very, very relevant to them. Many of them were customers, so we were able to track that within their customer profile. And I got to say, 90% of that was done by our marketing team. We supplied some of the subject matter expertise and some of the guidance, but our marketing team was who ran with it and leveraged an automated platform to be able to have that omni-channel follow-up that we just don't have the cycles or scale to go do. So let me pause there for 1 second, Gal. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's also crucial. We see companies leveraging customer marketing and advocacy to feed some of that data to the customer success team. So for example, asking customers, especially the long tail, but also others, the value, because you might ask the business value, you might ask your top 2-3 contacts, but if there are 10 users, the other 7, you actually have marketing reach out to and ask them, what's the business value for you? What is going well? Satisfaction. So if you could collect at scale, customer satisfaction, customer values, customer feedback, quotes, customer stories, reviews, whatnot, that's a lot of data that helps you when you come to that decision maker, when you come to that renewal point or to that QBR become much smarter or insightful about the account from a bigger perspective and not just your direct contact and your direct conversations.
You bring up an interesting point. Even in the case of the tier ones, like when I was talking about earlier, we invest a lot in these accounts. Usually tier one, tier two accounts, they could make up anywhere from 70% to as much as 85% of your total business. But it doesn't mean you want to let 15 to 25% of your business just go and wane, right? So you need to find that right balance. But the reason why we had created this sort of numeric scorecard of weights was to try to get ahead of challenges and to try to get understanding when the services team said the account was doing great, but there was a loss or change of ownership, we wanted to make sure we could capture for that. What would be an additional value onto the side of this would be the collection of all of the different opinions and all of the different insights for all of the different users beyond just the users, beyond just the champions, right? So you always almost hear from your champions. They're usually who attends your user group, and they're usually who participate in your in some of your community events. But you're not going to have a total aggregated picture of the different perspectives just because it's a sheer numbers game. So actually being able to funnel that in and use it as a bi-directional capture of content going out and content and feedback and opinions coming in, and not limit it to just champions and executive buyers, is probably another dimension of this we could add. You can be the 13th element of the heuristic, Al.
By the way, do you incentivize CSMs for kind of fostering advocacy? So finding out champions, asking them what they're willing to do, sending them over to marketing or to sales or whatever. I mean, do CSMs have any role in that?
Yes, they do. Right now, we're doing spot bonuses for the remainder of this year as we get testimonials created, videos created. We have a number of customers that already signed up on their own volition to be reference accounts for us, which is great. But the storytelling is what becomes pretty difficult, especially if they work for a large public multinational company. And so we actually put financial incentives for our CSMs to stick with the process of being able to carry a good story all the way through PR and legal and all that, which could take months in some cases.
Wow, yeah.
But carry that through so that they're rewarded on the other side. If we had, and again, most sort of sub 100 million, 100 million, $200 million companies, they don't have a ton of marketing resources, and their marketing resources that they do have are heavily focused on lead generation, pipeline generation,
right.
And there's a small sliver of it that's usually angled towards advocacy. And that's where having an automation platform kind of at scale do some of the work for you and at least hone the focus of those few groups is positive. And it also gives the CSM something to align with as they're trying to turn some of these testimonials into true stories that customers can share.
Cool. Okay. So I'm encouraging everybody to ask questions. We have like 10 minutes to go. So we'll shoot off a few questions in I guess in 5 minutes, we'll stop and just answer questions. So send over questions. Any other topics we want to go through, Alex?
Yeah, so I'm kind of in my home stretch here, but just sort of some final parting words. And there's enough about this space that is still really, it's still nascent in some ways, which is why you can have somebody from marketing move eventually into becoming a chief customer officer, own all the dimensions of customer success, plus own marketing, but maybe not own not own sales. Other dimensions like Nick, where he's owning the traditional customer success roles, plus now he's owning all of the revenue coming in, including the sales team, but probably not owning marketing. So there's still a lot of flexibility here, and so my parting words are, to own your kitchen sink. There is a chance here for everyone that sits within any customer success function, and it doesn't have to be a CSM. It could be it could be somebody in pre-sales, it could be somebody in post-sales, it could be somebody in tech support, that to know who they should be working with within the company to deliver well for the customer, and to take it on themselves to educate those teams. Like if you're in tech support, you're in a great position to educate product and engineering of what their role is and what they could be doing to make the customer experience better. And I'm not saying to go off the reservation and invent it on your own, there's kind of a framework of pillars and interlocks that you can leverage. And you could be that voice of the customer, even within the trenches of tech support. So, own your kitchen sink, because it may be your sink, it could be other people's dishes. Be bold and don't be afraid to build a plan. Especially, sometimes people are saying, oh, what is it? Dress for the job you want, not the one you have. Some people will tell you that, you have to stay in your lane, and, customer success owns this or customer success owns that. If you talk to any customer success automation platform, CEO, leadership team, COO, they'll tell you that they've heard every description, every pushback, from here to Sunday. And the reality is, build a plan even if you, with the functions, even if you don't own the functions. Build a plan and assume that they may not know what the best thing is for them to do in order to be an advocate for the customer and to be a voice of the customer, no matter what organization they sit in. And quite frankly, the other side is this: if you don't build the plan, if you don't lay out for them what they really need to be doing and how they could better weave customer success into their daily, weekly, and quarterly functions, chances are you're going to get exposed at some point. So build the plan and build those interlocks sooner rather than later. Don't wait for a moment where everything has to come together. Companies usually don't have challenges coming together in times of crises. They have trouble building something that systematically scales. And why? Why do this? Because if you're in customer success, eventually you're going to wear this t-shirt. And it's, and look, I'm not saying that people in customer success are perfect and it's never their fault. Everybody has their faults, myself included. I've learned, I've made more mistakes, and from those mistakes, I've learned. But there will be other times where it literally will not be your fault, but it will be your problem. And so the sooner you can build, I would say, the systematic voice of the customer within all of the different functions of your company, and be the leader that steps up and does that, so that you can influence on behalf of your customer. You'll be probably sooner in a position where you're owning a bigger piece of the business, and it won't be a detriment to your career. So that's what I got.
Okay, so first of all, thanks a lot, Alex, for sharing all of that information and giving so much examples from your experience. A few quick questions. So let's start with one about where does customer advocacy reside? Is it, you're talking about ownership. So should it be under customer success or should it be under marketing?
Yeah, that's it's kind of funny. Like who owns the digital touch of the tier 3, tier 4 customers? And I would say that while customer success should own it, because we're talking about customers, almost all of the functions, the tools, the strategy really would sit within marketing, at least the strategic execution. And I look at, again, like I said earlier, most marketing teams have done so much in this space that it's really just taking it and pivoting the strategy to be more focused on install base rather than exclusively on net new logos and turning prospects into pipeline, MQLs into SQLs. I would say that from a customer advocacy perspective, it should ultimately be owned in customer success and can be purchased, either purchased in marketing or customer success, but how it's going to be leveraged and implemented, and how the strategy to use it is going to be designed, I say it's 50-50. Most marketers will know better how to do the one-to-many. They just will. Customer success will understand what types of message and what types of values tend to be representative of the voice of the customer. It's bringing those two together. That's why I say it could be co-owned. The strategy at least could be co-owned, but I could see it be purchased out of either.
We have a question for Erwin. So he understands why you have 12 items that you track, but that's a bit much, at least for smaller organizations, perhaps, or whatever. Is there a way to skim it down a bit?
Yeah. So, and it's a good point. And I'm always been a fan of sort of maybe lay out the sort of worst case scenario of everything you need to keep your eye on. And then if you go to different companies, and I've brought this heuristic to lots of companies that I've advised, and we end up trimming it down to more like 5 or 6 things, because they may not need to have integrations and automation, right? As soon as somebody downloads their stuff, they really just want to target them with specific messaging and content that the customer can implement themselves. So it really depends on those 3 questions that I mentioned earlier in the presentation. Are you a difficult, complex technical sell? Are you an expansion play? And if your answers to that are the customer can kind of curate their own and evolve and download and expand on their own, and getting them to value is fairly quick and doesn't require a lot of help from your core teams, then yeah, you could probably remove quite a bit of this. But this was designed and is used by companies that are not Snapchat. You know, it's not download, click, click, click. Okay, I'm in and I'm communicating and there's value. I'm exchanging data. This was built for those companies that are trying to get customers to either adopt a comprehensive platform and or do things differently than they have in the past. And the third dimension, which is the other point from my slide earlier, is getting customers, different functions at a customer, to work together in a way that they've never worked together before. And so that's when you have those dynamics, which are not uncommon nowadays, and are being replaced by API and SDK integration. If you have those dynamics, you do want to have something that is looking fairly comprehensively at least your top accounts.
Another question. So renewals, upsells, expansion. If CS basically owns that or manages that, then, you know, what does sales do? Only net new logos, and how does all that relationship play?
Yeah. Look, I think if there are pure SaaS play companies that have made the draconian move to hunter and farmer, where you have the hunter rep get the net new logo, he or she hangs onto that logo for 6 months or 9 months, and at the end of that period, is it a full-blown 100% transition to an account manager or a CSM with an account manager focus? I've seen that in a few places. I more often see that happen at a certain tier of account versus every tier of account. And the short answer is you might have different incentive structures for tier 1 accounts versus tier 2 accounts versus tier 3 accounts across the AE or regional sales manager to the CSM or the customer success manager. It may not be a one size fits all. And what we often do is start with the tier 1s. All right, what does a tier 1 customer look like? What is the investment portfolio that we give to a tier 1 based on the resources that we have and what that type of customer needs? And then we can back into the model, how much time from RSM or an account executive, how much time from CSM, how much time from services, are we doing midterm, long-term staffing of services? Is there a partner involved? And we go through that kind of operational rhythm to figure out what resources of what type are needed to make a tier 1 customer successful. And that gives us not only a profile for what resources we're going to put on it from our current team, but it also lets us talk to finance saying, hey, look, Apple may have only spent $50,000 with us, but it's Apple. So we're going to focus on it as if it's a tier 1, even though the other customers in tier 1 have done 10 to 100 times the spend. But we all agree it's a tier 1, so it gets those resources. And as you go from that tier 1 to tier 2, you'll find in the compensation plans for sales reps and CSMs, you almost get this sort of opposite of incentive structure for a net new. CSMs will get paid on net new, but an expansion deal, the rep will get paid on the expansion deal, but so will the CSM. Rep will get paid more because they are taking more of their variable in incentive, but the CSM will have a small piece of it. They'll get paid more heavily on renewals, so the rep will be paid less on renewals. But we still believe the high performing companies out there have kept some element of incentive with the sales rep, even after the deal is done for a renewal to come in.
Great. So I think with that, we'll end. We're on time. Thank you very much, Alex, for sharing all those insights and information. And thank you for the people who stayed all the way to the end.
Thank Thank you, Kyle. Appreciate
And
the
of course, if
opportunity.
anybody has future questions, you can ping them up to me and Alex, connect with us on LinkedIn, and we'll try to answer. And hope you all learned some new stuff and enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, Alex, for sharing.
Thanks, Kyle. Appreciate it. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers.
Have a great day. Great
Bye-bye.
week. Cheers.